Hello everyone, my name is Yawa Edie and I'm the Program Coordinator for Africa Center's Enhancing Gender Equity Program, and you are listening to Better Than the Cure, Preventing Intimate Partner Violence. As you know, this is a podcast series that has featured multiple guests from different fields, sectors, areas of life, all with knowledge and expertise on factors, impacts, and consequences of intimate partner violence, specifically within African, Black, Caribbean communities here in Alberta. Today we have a special guest. We have Navaid Aziz, who works with youth integration and actually de-radicalization across Canada and internationally, specifically with Muslim communities. So I'll let him tell us a little bit more about himself before we jump into today's episode.
For sure. So I was born and raised in Montreal, moved to Calgary about 11 years ago, and since then I've been heavily involved in youth mentoring programs. And basically we take a holistic approach where we use social services and social work with religious education, with extracurricular activities, and skill development like public speaking and so on and so forth, and put a program together to develop, the next generation of young Muslim men.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And we really appreciate you joining today. We really want to tackle and shed light and address the areas of Islam that we might not know too much about, specifically when it comes to the Black community, because we know a lot of our Black population is Muslim. So really appreciate having you on today. And
Thank you so
I guess
much.
maybe we'll just jump right into it. My first question for you is, what are some common misconceptions about the role of Islam in intimate partner violence?
I would say right off the bat that people have the assumption that Islam condones intimate partner violence, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Like, the ultimate role model in Islam is the Prophet Muhammad himself, and time again we've seen that he's intervened in situations where there was intimate partner violence and tried his utmost best to prevent it as much as possible, and then was also proactive in telling people that you have to be kind, merciful, and gentle with your spouses. So we see both of these taking place in the prevention side, as well as the proactive education of being kind, merciful, and compassionate. So I think this misconception that Islam condones intimate partner violence is something that we need to keep struggling towards eradicating.
Mm-hmm. And where do you think that misconception came from?
So I think there's two things about it. Number one, people see someone that looks Muslim and therefore it has to represent all Muslim men, which I think a lot of communities face. But then number two, there's also certain scriptures and certain incidents in the Quran itself that can be misinterpreted as if they condone intimate partner violence.
Okay, and that's kind of one of my questions that I had for you, actually. Are there any specific passages that maybe you can think of that might be applied out of context or used to maybe push forward or justify intimate partner violence despite it being totally wrong in Islam?
Of course, 100%. So chapter number 4, verse number 34. So it's interesting because the chapter is called the chapter of women, like how ideal. And then verse number 34, it talks about basically the relationship in the household, on how there has to be a leader in the household, and that leader of the household has to be the provider and has to be the protector. So traditionally the man was the provider and the protector of the household, and the woman was the maintainer and the sustainer of the household. Then as this verse goes on, it talks about how do you resolve marital conflict, but not only regular marital conflict, but the highest form of marital conflict where you have open rebellion and open cheating, right? So what do you do in that sort of situation? And the Quranic commandment, the first two are very simple, that you advise one another, like be conscious of God, be conscious of there's a hellfire that awaits the sinners, and so on and so forth. So this advice is supposed to take place. Then number two, there's supposed to be a separation of the beds, meaning that they shouldn't be sleeping in the same bed, as a form of showing that you're displeased with the person's actions and what they're doing. And then the last part, that's where it gets tricky, because the Arabic word darb is used. And in the Arabic language, I guess this is from the nuances of it, there's 17 different usages of this word, right? So how you interpret it out of these 17 different ways can make a huge difference.
Right.
Because darb can mean to strike something, but darb can also mean to walk away and to travel, right? And then there's actually a school of exegesis where how you have Bible studies and you explain the Bible? Similarly, we have that for the Quran as well. And you find interpretations of this that clearly show that there's not supposed to be any form of physical harm. You are allowed to show your anger. You're not allowed to bruise or to damage or to break or any of those things, right? So when it's convenient, people be like, yeah, I'm allowed to do this to my wife because the Quran says so. And I'm like, okay, you took this one verse, but how about the 6,680 other verses that tell you have to be kind and merciful and just, right? So yeah, I think that's like the main one that gets taken out of context.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for shedding light on that. And I know similarly in the Bible too, there's certain passages that people take out of context to, where it says the man is the head of the home, the woman has to submit, and that's just used to justify IPV. So thanks for clearing that up. Now we can say Navaid said it. It's in the Quran.
I mean, I actually have like a whole session on YouTube talking about domestic violence in Islam, just focusing on this one verse.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because
we'll have to link that.
Because it's not enough just to spend like 2 minutes explaining it, particularly for the Muslim audience that wants to delve deeper into it. I'm like, okay, let's spend half an hour discussing this one verse. Yeah.
And then, do you find that in the Islamic community or in the Muslim community, how important is it for there to be figures such as yourself, sheikhs or imams that provide support? Because we know there's the formal services, which are great. They all have a role and a part to play in preventing intimate partner violence. But how important is the role of a sheikh or imam or religious leader, do you find, in either Muslim or religious communities in general?
I think very important. But I think this has to come with a caveat. Like overall, there's a decline that religions are facing in terms of adherence to faith, right? So as we progress as a society, those that are fresh immigrants seem to be more religious, but the more time they spend in Canada, the less religious they become. And there's an institute called Cardis that's been studying, immigrant populations in Canada, and they show, like literally over decades and generations, people become less religious. So when people talk about the roles of imams, and religious figures, they have to understand that it comes with this caveat that we only have access to about 5% of the population. The other 95% of the population is like in mainstream society. So if you're not targeting them at work, at school, on YouTube and other social media platforms, more than likely you're not going to reach them.
Right. So when we're developing these resources or programs, do you think it's essential that, if you want to target, a Muslim or a specific religious community, that religious leaders or organizations kind of work together with maybe formal service providers to ensure that maybe that religious component is still included?
Of course, 100%, without a shadow of a doubt. And I always think there is merit to it. Like, it's better to do more than it is to do less, right? So if we can focus on certain passages of the Quran and certain hadith of the Prophet Muhammad that will relate better with adhering Muslims, then why not?
And when we talk about Muslim men, and I love that work that you mentioned, where you trying to raise the next generation of Muslim men, what pressures do you find Muslim men face that maybe contribute or perpetuate IPV, be it cultural, societal, any kind of expectations that you can think of?
This is going to get dirty very quickly. So I'm sure you're familiar with Andrew Tate.
Yes.
And Andrew Tate recently became Muslim.
Oh, really?
Yes, he accepted Islam, I want to say 3 or 4 months ago. It was a big gong show on Muslim Twitter and Muslim internet in terms of how do you respond to something like this, right? So you have this component of, you're happy that someone embraced your faith, but have they made amends of all the damage that they've done, right? And then all of a sudden, like, we have this crisis in masculinity, and people like Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson are put at the forefront of, okay, these are the true representatives of masculinity. But they're not, because there's a fine line between what is portrayed as, red pill masculinity versus the prophetic role model, right? That prophetic role model that was very tender and very caring towards people and wanted what's best for people's worldly life and afterlife as well, right? And these sort of individuals don't have that in mind, right? So I think that's like one big challenge right there. Number 2 is, okay, we've identified, the difficult role models, but we don't have positive role models that are easily accessible as well, right? And I think this is across the spectrum, that good positive role models that are accessible are far and few in between, right? So when we look at mentoring programs, when we look at, Big Brother programs and things like that, getting access to those is next to impossible, and not everyone will be fortunate enough to get access to that. And then number 3, I think when you look at the trajectory of society in terms of where it's going, there is this definition problem in terms of what does it mean to be a man, right? What does masculinity look like? Right. And then you can argue back and forth, and up until you have objective, points of view on this, it's going to be next to impossible to resolve. So I think those are some of the issues that come into play.
Definitely. And masculinity is definitely a big thing. And I like the fact that you mentioned role models, because when we look at the role of men in intimate partner violence, we know that healthy relationships or gender relations father figures are definitely a big thing, especially when you're
course.
looking at young boys and modeling. So when you imagine basically a good role model for young boys or masculinity in general, what does that encompass, especially for like Muslim men? What should the standard be, of masculinity? If you feel like you can, say.
I mean, I think there's a very simplistic answer, but it's not a practical answer. Like the Prophet Muhammad is meant to be the standard of masculinity, right? So you have your spiritual life that is taken care of. You have your work life that is taken care of. You have your family life that's taken care of. So it's about a balance in everything that you do. But the key distinguishing factor is that you're doing everything with the intention of pleasing God, right? So all of that needs to be taken into consideration. So yes, it's very easy to tell people that, yes, follow the Prophet Muhammad, but that requires education. That requires understanding, okay, how do we take someone from 14 centuries ago and place him into Alberta right now? Like, what would it be like, right? What would he do in this situation? So those sort of questions, oftentimes we're not equipped to answer. So those are definitely challenges that need to be addressed. So at a simplistic level, the Prophet Muhammad is meant to be the ultimate role model. But on a practical level, how do you simplify it for people and contextualize it for people in this day and age?
Okay. And when we talk more about challenges, what kind of challenges are there in engaging Muslim men in the conversation about IPV? Because that's something that's very stigmatized. People want to stay away from. They don't want to be implicated in maybe people seeing or thinking of them as violent. So what are some challenges do you find?
I think addressing culture is a big thing. So certain cultures, it's very taboo to talk about your family matters outside of your home, right? So if there is a family matter, it's meant to stay within the family. And oftentimes the family is not equipped to deal with these issues. So taking it outside, you're going to bring shame to your family and you're going to be ostracized for doing so. So those are some of the challenges that will definitely come up. Number two, again, is that if you look at social media, and I think this is something that we need to have a discussion on, like there was this whole phenomenon of right-wing extremism that took place, that people that watched one video, then these algorithms automatically promoted right-wing extremism to them. But I think the same is true also with intimate partner violence and the role models that people are looking up to. Like you watch one Andrew Tate video for the sake of being curious, then all of a sudden you're bombarded with like Andrew Tate videos.
1 second
Exactly,
video,
right?
And your whole feed is
and then like you have to try so hard to change your feed, and it's amazing. Like with all the bad stuff, it's all there. But anytime you're trying to get into something good, it takes like forever the algorithm to pick it up. So I think that's a second major challenge. Number three, there is a shortage of safe spaces. Like if you're going through a problem with your family, like where do you go? Like what's considered a safe space where you can discuss it and find resolution and so on and so forth. And I know I'm going to jump the gun here on this one, but if you look at even programming that's offered for individuals that have been perpetuators of intimate partner violence, like I'm not aware of any, right? And then to say that, within the Muslim community that cater towards Muslim men, there's even fewer programs, even if they did exist, right? So I think those are some of the things. Yeah.
Okay, great. And if you were to envision maybe programming, like you said, there's not too many out there, but if you had all the time, all the resources, the money, the capacity to kind of put a program that would be effective together specifically for Muslim men, what would that look like?
So this is just my theory, but I think you've alluded to this already. I would start off with a parenting course. And this is going to sound very like pessimistic, like I've lost faith in our generation. And that's not to say that at all. But I think one of the key things is that up until we learn how to parent and send positive messaging towards kids and being positive role models for our kids, we're not going to be able to holistically tackle this issue, because time and time again we see that people that perpetuate intimate partner violence, they were brought up in homes of intimate partner violence, right? So that's something that we need to begin with. And I think that's where I would begin with as a long haul approach. Let's start teaching people how to handle parenting. Number two, let's talk about effective communication. Let's talk about anger management. And if you look at our education systems, I think there's a problem in the education systems as well. Like, why are these critical skills that people need to survive not taught in our schools? And this is like not to diss math, but why are we learning calculus? Yeah. Like, when do we implement it in our lives? Like 1% of the population might end up using it at some point in their lives, but the other 99% aren't going to use it, yet it is a mandatory part of our curriculum, right? So I think there are important questions that need to be asked over there. So parenting, conflict resolution, communication, and then even just like mindfulness, like learning how to regulate your emotions and things like that. Like all these important skills, I would make it mandatory in our education systems. And then number three, the importance of mentoring. And again, this sounds very self-serving, But I believe like in all fields, whether it is in physical health, mental health, finances, education, whatever it may be, there's this concept of let's learn from the mistakes of the people that have preceded us, and let's build on that, right? And if we're not mentoring and passing on that information, that's not going to take place. So similarly over here, proactively having scenarios played out that, okay, you're getting married now or you're in a relationship now, problems are going to arise.
Right.
Let's role play in terms of how you're going to solve this. No one tells you how to do this stuff, right? Who trained you in terms of how to respond to a conflict in your relationship? We're not taught that, right? So I think those 4 key components would go a long way.
No, and it's funny that you mentioned parenting, because actually that's one of the big things that we identified on top of, education, employment, training, finances, and gender relations too. All these things play a part in intimate partner violence and look different for different communities, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Christian, an immigrant, first generation, second generation, which is great. So I guess now when we look at putting all these things together, how important is it that we engage the community? So it's one thing for people to come out, but do you think they would be receptive to something like this? Like, is it just
in developing a program or in being a part of a program?
In being a part.
I think there is a stigma still attached to it, right? It's similarly like with mental health and minority groups, that there still is that stigma of, I don't want to acknowledge that there's something wrong with me, because if I do, it's a form of weakness, right? And similarly over here, if I'm proactively seeking help about this topic, I may be considered a perpetuator, right? And I think that those sort of taboos and stigmas are still there. So it'd be very, very difficult to get buy-in from that. But I think going to the other side of this question, how important is it for community members to be a part of establishing programs and getting them up and running and developing them? It is of the utmost importance, right? Like those cultural nuances, religious nuances, they're going to make a huge difference. And as soon as you can put on your program that this was verified and validated by such and such organization and community, obviously not everyone's going to come flocking to it, but at least it'll bring an element of trust that when I am ready to it, I know I can trust this program.
And do you think maybe it would take off more if sheikhs or imams such as yourself were kind of the forefront or the face of these programs and stuff like that?
So I think this is a double-edged sword. Like if you put someone that's religious as the face of it, it basically means we want religious people to come, right? And if we're agreeing to the fact that 95% of people aren't religious, are we pushing them away? So I think there is a space for the religious figures to be a part of the program, but they definitely shouldn't be the face of the program, because that may actually push people away.
Right. No, that's a great point. So in what capacity, for example, would you see yourself being involved in something? If not the face, then what role, where could you fill in? Because I think if you still have co-sign from people such as yourselves, then people have that trust to be a part of the program. But you said not be the face, so then where do you think
so
it'd be best?
I think I would break it down into 3 things. Number 1, I would look through the program and add any input that I have, and then say that, look, I've validated the program and I agree with the program. So to put my stamp of trust on it, that'd be number 1. Number 2, to be a part of it in some sort of capacity. Like education is my full-time job, and I tend to think that I'm pretty good at it. So any place that I could have in terms of playing an educational role, I would definitely be a part of it. And then number 3, advocating for it, right? Like, having a platform comes with a responsibility, and if I can use my platform to share, such programs, I would definitely do so.
So when you talk about education, is that more of the actual facilitator of maybe some courses or development of curriculum or courses, like everything you mentioned from parenting to emotional regulation and, anger management, communication, those are all awesome. So would you be involved maybe in developing those types of courses?
With help, yes, for sure.
Okay.
With help, yeah.
Okay, that's great. In terms of having these courses made available to the community is one thing, but we still do know that IPV is a problem, and there are people that perpetuate it. So how can you still hold men accountable while still giving them space to grow and to learn and to get the opportunity to maybe not make the same mistake twice?
Yeah, and I think this is a huge challenge, because often what ends up happening is they become vilified, and it's as if there's no redemption for them. And I think this is where religion plays a very important role, because religion always teaches that you're not defined by the sin that you commit, and there's always a road to redemption. So I think that lens of religion will come in very, very handy, that okay, if you've done this once, we repent for it, we acknowledge that we made the mistake, we make amends with the people that we've harmed. Now let's move forward and try to amend our behavior and to make sure that we don't repeat it again. So I think that is very, very important in terms of the education piece. Number 2, again, is about safe spaces. And I think oftentimes what ends up happening in religious communities is like people get publicly shamed,
Yeah.
right? And gossip spreads like wildfire, right? So people are even shy to show up in religious spaces now because they're afraid that people are going to know who they are and what they did, and you know what, they're going to have to deal with it. And it's a very difficult conversation to have. So I think even creating safe spaces, almost like a support group like Alcoholics Anonymous, like unless you're a part of the program, you don't know where it is and what time it is, right?
Yeah.
So something like that, I think, will go a very long way, where people will have anonymity. And we encourage people to do it, right? Like we want to encourage people to take positive steps for change in their lives. And then third and last but not least, I think, again, this has to be a holistic approach where we're regularly talking about prevention. And prevention is about being kind, merciful, and caring towards your spouses and your partners. And then there's okay, if a mistake happens, how do you resolve this, right? And both sides, that a woman should not have to tolerate it, nor should men continue to perpetuate it, right? And I think, if I can bring out dirty community laundry, like this has been one of the biggest challenges, that any time a woman came, there was this general concept of be patient, right? Patience is a virtue in religion, yes, but not in the face of tolerating of violence, right? Like that wasn't the case. And I think that has been a huge issue. But the positive that's coming out now is, as people are getting more educated through the internet, and they're realizing that Islam does not condone, intimate partner violence. Okay, like when the Imam tells them, be patient, they're like, no, that's not right. Yeah. Patience does not mean I tolerate abuse. Patience means that I use every avenue that I have to get out of the situation while adhering to my religious principles, right? So there's a positive that's coming out of that. So all of that to say, I think that the training of imams, the training of religious figures, clergy, about how to handle these situations. Because I think people don't understand this, but becoming an imam is very different than becoming a pastor or a priest. Because they will go through some sort of formal training on pastoral care. Most imams just have religious training.
Really?
They can give you, like I'm trained but to be a religious jurist. Like you ask me a legal question, that's what I'm trained to answer. Okay. I had to go through a series of trainings when I came back to Canada to develop those skills, right? So I think understanding where those challenges are and providing solutions to those challenges, and even telling communities that as you hire your imams, what are the qualifications that you're looking for? Like people aren't just interested in religious verdicts anymore. Okay, I'm having a family issue. What can you do to help us resolve this, right? So providing that form of training and investing in your imams is very, very important. And I just went on this massive tangent.
No, that's amazing, because you got you talking. So now you opened up a rabbit hole for me, because I really wanted to ask, in your eyes, maybe, what are those qualifications? What are some things that imams or religious leaders or sheikhs need to have in order to be qualified to counsel families or be actually a support system for intimate partner violence situations? Yeah,
I don't have an answer to that, but I think look, there's a lot that needs to be done. So the traditional imam role was just to lead the 5 daily prayers, and the imam did nothing else. Then eventually that developed. Okay, lead the 5 daily prayers, give the Friday sermon, teach some basic Quran classes. But then that developed even further. Okay, now there's a family issue. Let's go to the imam. There's a health issue. Let's go to the imam. Like all these things that the imam is not qualified for, let's go to them. And I understand it comes from a good place that the imam is spiritually inclined. They believe that he's closer to God, and therefore, he should have these answers. But at the end of the day, if the imam hasn't trained in those things, you're putting them in a no-win situation where they're going to feel bad not being able to help you. And at the same time, they themselves do not have resources to invest in their own education, right? Because their salaries are so low, their time is so limited, and their obligations are many. So all of that to say, I think, let's start with simple mental health training. Let's start with, how to identify intimate partner violence, and collecting a database of resources that are available. So even if you cannot handle a situation, at least you can outsource this to where it can be done. Those are probably the 2 places that I'd start off with. Yeah,
no, that's great, actually, because as you mentioned, the role has evolved. So to things that you're not trained to do, but if we were to equip, and we already talked about the resources that were developed, but to equip imams and sheikhs or other religious leaders with other skills outside of religious duties would go a long way, because now the person you trust to deal with your family can actually deal with your family.
Exactly.
Issues. Yeah, no, that's great. And when we're working with because right now we've been talking exclusively about the Muslim community, what resources would best cater to them. Do you think that there's merit in maybe collaboration with formal service providers or, non-religious service providers or entities in general, or should resources for the Muslim community be developed solely by the Muslim community?
No, I think I'm a strong believer in partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are certain things that the Muslim community cannot handle within of themselves. And I also believe that Muslims can take some of those things and put like an Islamic lens on it, right? So when we talk about mental health, integrating, religious spirituality into it, right? So those sort of things can definitely go a long way. So I think there is definitely room for collaboration. But again, it requires people that are open-minded enough to do so, know their own material well enough that to share it, and then develop it together, right? Yeah.
That's awesome. And I guess my last question for you as we wrap up here, when we talk about these programs and developing all these resources and all these great things that can happen, in your eyes, what would you use to define the success? How would you know that, okay, this has worked, intimate partner violence has been prevented, or communities aren't, reporting these rates anymore, things are looking good? What aspects would need to be measured to know that we're on the right track going forward?
So as a society or as a Muslim community?
Maybe both.
So let's start off with the Muslim community, because we're going to go down another rabbit hole here. So why is it that Muslim women don't come to complain about intimate partner violence to mosques anymore? It's because they've been told over time, be patient. That's what the faith requires of you. And because of such a useless answer, they stop coming to the mosque. So I think success would look like when women start coming back to the mosque and trusting their imams to give them solid advice and provide the help and support that they need. That's number one. Number two is in the creating of programming in collaboration with Muslims for Muslims. We haven't seen that yet. And then number three, open discussion of these topics, right? So it's not treated as something taboo. Okay, it's a part of our community and our society. Let's discuss it so that we can prevent it and help the victims, right? So I think those are the three things that I would look at for the Muslim community. Society as a whole, I think if we could improve reporting, because reporting is underreported. So let's see if we can get more people to report it and have faith in the help that is there that brings out the statistics. Then number two is actually bringing the numbers down, right? That's the most important thing, right? We want to bring those numbers down. And then there's a third part to this that I've thought about, but I haven't figured out how to articulate it. But what is the opposite or the antithesis of intimate partner violence? Like this concept of relationships that are wholesome, healthy, and loving and caring, and healthy. But what have we done to define those, right? And I think defining those things so that we can educate people and empower people to get there, right? Like there isn't enough discussion on that. So I think that as a society, that's what I'd like to see.
Amazing, thank you. And I know I said last question, but this is
I knew it, because no worries.
So the last question is actually, how can people keep up with you and the work that you're doing, or stay connected to Navaid Aziz and things that he's doing in the community?
So I'll give a disclaimer. I have this problem of being the jack of all trades. So like today we're talking about intimate partner violence. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about Islamic finance and mental health. So I would say I do have a website that basically if anyone wants to get in touch, they can get in touch through my website, navaidaziz.com. I'm very active on social media, mainly Facebook and Instagram. I do have some engagement on Twitter, but that's where you'll find me.
That's everything for today. Thank you so much for taking your time to speak to me, to us here on Better Than the Cure, Preventing Intimate Partner Violence. And we hope that everyone listening was able to learn something new, to take something away from this, and hopefully use it for your own organization, the current or future work that you'll possibly be doing. In the meantime, please listen to all the other episodes. There's been a lot that we've recorded, and with multiple guests as amazing as Navaid here. But until then, we will see you all next time, and take care. Thank you for listening to Better Than the Cure, Preventing Intimate Partner Violence.